Why do we have to wear these stupid robes when we graduate? I really don't get it. Unless your name begins with justice, you shouldn't have to wear a robe. Welcome to Rumble Book Club. I'm your host, Michael Hernandez, and this is the show where a normal guy like me can talk about interesting books I've read, old and new, good and bad. So if you like the show, you like the content, you like the books that I talk about, or maybe you think it's also farcical that we have to wear a robe every time we graduate, you've come to the right place, my friend. Follow us and subscribe, hit that little bell so it lets you know when the next episode comes out, and even donate to the show if you want to help provide books. Today we're going to take a look at an awesome book that I just finished, and I'm really excited that I finished it because now I get to share it with you. Today we're going to take a look at Inside American Education by Thomas Sowell. Sowell takes aim at the entire American education system from the lowest levels of primary education to secondary education and college. He breaks down some of the most glaring failures of our schools, matched up against how officials within the systems attempt to explain away and distract from those failures. So let's jump into the evaluation, starting with aesthetics. It's pretty simple other than the kind of word clutter here. So as far as the aesthetics, pretty basic, 7 out of 10. Now let's look at the readability. This is actually one of Sowell's more straightforward pieces, and the average reader can work through it pretty easily. He does spend a lot of time making sure his terms and definitions are clear before proceeding to the actual point overall, but the book has effective flow and he provides common sense comparisons to draw connections between concepts, which definitely helps for the average reader that doesn't exactly sit there and dive into the economics of the academic system. So as far as the readability, very solid score, 8 out of 10. Now let's look at the content. Sowell establishes that most of what has become American education is nothing more than a giant enterprise built on creating and securing jobs, funding research, indoctrinating a captive audience on the latest social trends, and avoiding accountability and responsibility at all costs. He discusses a multitude of failings, including the fact that our current system spends more money in general and per capita on our students with some of the lowest and most embarrassing real-time results, especially compared to other countries. Regardless of what tests are chosen and the amount of children who pass school on paper, the level of academic competence and the ability to think, the actual ability to not just memorize facts, but to think through problems, has been in a absolute free fall for decades now, and this was written in the 1990s, so there's been 20 years of a continuous decline since then if you look at the numbers today. Much of this has to do with the loosening of standards, school systems using more time, resources, and manpower to teach kids subjects outside the purview of the public schools, as well as shortcomings among actual teachers and administrators. On that point about teachers and administrators, he actually makes note of something that I never knew before reading, and that's the fact that the schools of education on college campuses where they teach individuals how to become teachers, those are generally the lowest academically performing students on all the campus. If you look at every single major on a campus, including fine arts, I'm a fine arts major. I ain't the brightest bulb in the shed or sharpest tool in the shed, as I showed by that comparison. Of all the different majors that exist on campus, including art majors and people you wouldn't typically think of as like intellectually very bright, the lowest rung on that ladder pretty much are education majors, which was something I found really surprising. So it seems like even the crops of teachers that come through seem to be less academically capable than every other major and every other specialty. He gives examples of how scores in STEM subjects compare around the world and how America's scores have fallen, particularly among the top students, not on the bottom tier. So it's not that we're forgetting this lower rung of students and are neglecting them. What's actually happening is our top shelf talent, these gifted students, are actually getting essentially dumber over time. According to research by Sowell, the bottom of our student population is actually modestly rising, while the brightest in our midst are showing less and less unique intelligence, less ability to think through problems, less ability to even bring up basic recollection and basic memory skills. He shows how programs such as sex education, originally offered by officials to reduce teen pregnancy and the spread of STDs, has failed miserably in its goals since pushing a class that is not mostly biology driven, but is more values driven, with the values being that every kind of sexual activity and inclination is not just valued, but encouraged. He also provides examples used in the classroom to students that are way too young for some of the material presented to them, especially when it comes to drug awareness, death education, and sex education. Teachers have become willing advocates for these non-academic causes, such as comprehensive sex ed, death education, drug prevention, diversity classes, and more, going so far as to push children into silence in order to keep parents from knowing specifics about what they're taught. It's actually really gross. Each of these programs typically comes with financial incentives from third parties sponsoring these courses, or in some cases, government money provided by you and me, the taxpayer. On college campuses, Sowell makes the point that these institutions of so-called academic freedom and diversity are nothing more than indoctrination centers filled with lazy tenured professors and inept graduate assistants giving students the worst possible education value for their dollar. These schools quickly become bastions for double standards where students are punished more or less severely according to race or sexual inclination, and where speakers are shouted down and removed from campuses according to their beliefs, and where staff who don't toe the particular fad of the day risk losing their livelihood. This included the myriad cases of financial corruption involved, from the cabal of colleges conspiring on steadily rising tuition prices to the redefining of discretionary spending by calling it costs of education. Universities are producing subpar undergraduates while also exploiting athletes under the monopoly that's called the NCAA. I played for it myself. Sowell brings up several cases of the dismal numbers of college athletes in sports, such as basketball and football, who never earn their degrees and are thus left with no draft offers and no real formal education after the prime of their physical life is used up. There's this ongoing phrase that Sowell brings up that most athletes in the big sports like football, basketball, and to some extent baseball, they major in eligibility. So they don't have an actual major because they never actually earn a degree. They're just rubber stamped in these classes and never truly given an education. They're just told to play, and their bodies are essentially used up for this organization, the NCAA, which has a monopoly on young talent, and in some cases has actually coordinated in a very illicit manner with organizations like the NBA and the NFL. Sowell also takes aim at tenure and how it incentivizes a hustle for the first several years, this this up and out process where you're constantly having to ignore your students because you're having to do what really grants a professor tenure, which is research and publication. So the hours you spend publishing and working on research necessarily take away from hours that you're actually preparing for your classes to teach these undergraduates. So these undergraduates are being underserved for the exorbitant amounts of money that the colleges are coordinating to make them pay. Sowell makes the point that in no other profession, absolutely none, does a employee of a company or an organization have this much immunity of any form of consequence whatsoever. So because they're so insulated, they have no incentive to provide further good or service for the entity that they serve, for the college campus or for the student who they're allegedly there for. He does offer one solution that I kind of like regarding tenure. He offers the solution of the marketplace, which is multi-year contracts. Instead of going year to year as a teacher or year to year as a professor, you actually sign multiple year contracts. That way, it's kind of this middle ground between the obvious setback for a professor not knowing if you're going to be secure for the next two to 3 years. You're only living year to year, but also getting away from this whatever you want to call it, this complete diplomatic immunity of being a tenured professor. The content here is absolutely golden. Like every Thomas Sowell book, it is methodically and meticulously researched. In the back of a book, it's typical to find anywhere from 50 to 100 pages of notes and resources Thomas Sowell uses for his work. He doesn't settle on his own opinion. He deep dives every single issue, so you know the information you're getting here was very, very well researched. So as far as the content goes, perfect score, bar none, 10 out of 10. I got this book at Barnes & Noble. It's kind of hard to find. Sowell works at Barnes & Noble unless they're very new printings, but you can find it there, or you can look online or at your local bookstore. They tend to disappear quickly at local bookstores, but nonetheless, I highly recommend this book. Everyone watching this video has been educated in one form or another. Most of y'all, a vast majority of y'all, through the public school system. So I very, very highly recommend it. The book is Inside American Education. Go out and get yourself a copy. Thanks for watching, everybody, and go read something. Seriously, I look ridiculous. Unbelievable.